Before I begin, I want to tell you something. This is not a lecture. It is not a motivational talk. It's our version of teaching through testimony. And testimonies do not move in straight lines. They move the way memory moves, non-linear, with weight and texture, with the kind of truth that only comes out when you stop trying to make it presentable. Some of what I say today will sound clinical. That is because I am currently in school for psychology. I am also receiving a scholarship training directly from Dr. Richard S.P.R.O.U.T, the founder of Internal Family System, through Sounds True on the spirituality of IFS. I believe in naming all this because that is part of the retrieval. And some of what I say today is going to feel raw, because it is. My name is S.P.R.O.U.T Sophia. I am the founder of Sprout from Darkness, Soul Purpose Retrieval, Overcoming Unaddressed Trauma. I'm a trauma-informed peer support specialist, a survivor, a mother, a writer, and a woman who has spent the better part of the last decade trying to understand the architecture of her own survival. This podcast, Sprouted Reflections of S.P.R.O.U.T, lives here on YouTube. It is also the center of a broader content ecosystem, the Gathered Fragments blog at sproutfromdarkness.com, our community on Facebook at Sprouted Reflections I Am, and more platforms as the garden continues to grow. Everything connects. This episode is no exception. We are on episode 3. If you have been following along, you know we have been building, story by story, part by part, lens by lens, toward a framework called the Trinity of Self. But before I can tell you who we became, I have to tell you what happened at age 12. Because that is where another fracture happened, and that is where, without a name, without any clinical or academic language, without anyone teaching her what to do, the part that would eventually save me first appeared. Let's dive in. Okay, before we go into the story, I need to ask you something. And I mean actually ask you. Not as a podcast opener, not as a rhetorical warm-up. I want you to actually stop and think about this. Is there somebody in your life or a part of you that you genuinely cannot stand in a way that you cannot fully explain? Carl Jung would say that is your shadow showing up. That is where I want to start today. Not with a definition, not with a lecture, with that. Because shadow work is not an abstract spiritual concept. It is the most uncomfortable, most necessary, most liberating work you will ever do. And most people are doing it completely backwards without knowing it. Here's what I mean. You were not born with a shadow. You were born whole. Every capacity, the rage and the softness, the wildness and the tenderness, the hunger, the grief, the generosity, the fire. All of it was there from the beginning. Your essence came here complete. And then life started making decisions about which parts of you were allowed to exist out in the open. The parts that made people uncomfortable went underground. The parts that got you punished went underground. The parts that were too big, too loud, too much, too sad, too angry for the people around you to hold, they did not disappear. They went somewhere. And one place they went, according to Jung, was called the shadow. And here's the part nobody leads with. Those parts did not go underground because they were wrong. They went underground because the environment could not hold them. That is a completely different thing. Your anger was not the problem. The fact that nobody could receive it without making you pay for it, that was the problem. Your grief was not the problem. The fact no one sat with you in it, that was the problem. Your fierceness was not the problem. The fact that the world called it dangerous instead of necessary, that was the problem. Jung said something that illuminated something in me the first time I really sat with it. He said, "You do not become enlightened by imagining figures of light. You become enlightened by making the darkness conscious, not by hiding away from the hard parts." not by performing your way past them, but turning towards them by getting into actual relationship with what you have been running from. He called the process of becoming whole individuation. And the reason most people never get there is not because they are broken. It is because they keep trying to do the work by eliminating the uncomfortable parts instead of listening to what those parts are carrying. The shadow is not trying to destroy you. It is trying to tell you something. Now, if you want the full framework, the clinical breakdown, the Jungian lens laid out in the Soul Integration Framework, go visit the website at sproutfromdarkness.com. Go read it, sit with it, go visit the Soul Integration Framework and our blogs on Gathered Fragments. That is the map. What I am about to give you is the territory. Because at first, I did not learn any of this from a textbook. I learned it from a life that required it. And that life broke open again at 12. My biological father died when I was 12. I used to say that like it was just a fact I was reporting. Now I say it as the most precise description I have of what actually happened to me on the inside. Part of me died with him. Not metaphorically, my Puerto Rican culture, even though my ancestors never left my side. Something that had been full of life started to wither in real time. And this was not happening in a vacuum. This was landing on top of what you already heard in the last episode. The first tear at 8 years old. The foundation that had already shifted. So by 12 years old, Jackie Rose was not starting from solid ground. She was already carrying something. And then this. When the home you return to is already unpredictable, when emotional safety has never been guaranteed, when your nervous system has already spent years learning to read rooms and be on guard before anyone even says a word, a loss that size does not land gently. It lands like a detonation. Everything that was already cracked explodes open at once. I started struggling with suicidal ideation. I'm going to say that plainly, and I'm going to stay in it for a moment. Because I think we flinch from those words. I think we want to just fast forward right past them. And I am choosing not to today. I was 12 years old, and I was thinking about not being here anymore. Not abstractly, not philosophically, out of pain so enormous and unspeakable. I had nowhere to go. Out of grief that had no witness, no container, no hand reaching out to hold it. Out of a body that did not understand why it was still living when life had stopped feeling worth it. That is what happens when sorrow has nowhere to go. It turns inward. It becomes a quiet violence against yourself because you cannot name the actual violence. So the body finds another target, and the target becomes you. Younger me loved my mother. I want to say that before anything else, because what comes next only makes sense inside of that love. She told me once, when I was older, that I had been the most loving little girl when I was younger. Jackie Rose. That was who I was. She was not wrong. I remember loving her. I remember being hers. But something transformed between that little girl and the teenager who would end up in the living room with a knife. It was not me deciding to become someone unlovable. It was survival that required a different version of me than love had. I grew up with an alcoholic, abusive stepfather. The kind of unpredictability that teaches a child's nervous system to always be aware, to always be vigilant. And at 12, already carrying the grief and the weight of the death of my father that I had barely begun to know, with the earlier wound of learning I was not my stepfather's biological daughter, and being told that was the reason he treated me the way he did, the body was already keeping score of things the mind could not yet hold. And then there was a night. I was at a friend's house. We snuck out. Little Lucia was already in motion, always pushing towards something, even when that something was dangerous. What happened that night was a violation. My friend and I were separated. The cops came. There ended up being a sane kit exam needed. And then a later traumatizing, disassociated appearance in a room full of adults at a court date. People discussing what had happened to my body while I sat there not fully inside of it. I want to stop here. If you are listening to this and you know what I mean by that disassociated feeling, that experience of watching something happen to your own life from somewhere slightly outside of it, I want you to know something. That is not weakness. That is your nervous system doing exactly what it knows how to do to protect you from what it cannot fully process. What I did not know then was that I would one day sit in those same hospitals as an on-call advocate representing the YWCA Western Massachusetts, holding space for survivors going through the same sane exams I had once gone through myself. That kind of full circle does not always feel like healing when you're living it. Sometimes it feels like being trusted with something sacred because you survived it yourself. When I was 12, that violation landed on a body already exhausted, already bracing, already learning that the world was unsafe. It was one more thing the body absorbed without language, without witness, without anyone saying, "This should have never happened to you." Lucia was already forming. The knife in the living room pointed at my stepfather was just the moment she became loud enough for the world to hear. When another threat came, a part of me responded, not to harm, to say, "I will not be hurt." My mother called the police on me. Her daughter, her once most loving little girl, the one who had trusted her in the way children trust the person they love most in the world, completely, imperfectly, with everything they have. The police came. The system agreed with her assessments, and the criminal was born. Not yet then in a courtroom, not necessarily in a record, but in the moment my mother handed me to the very machinery that would define the next decades of my life. That is when little Lucia appeared, not yet named, not yet known, as a necessity. The part that looked at everything that had been happening and made a decision that would shape every year that followed. If no one will protect me, I will protect myself. She did not arrive softly. She could not afford to. I was thrown into the juvenile systems. I had just lost my father. I was drowning in grief I could not name. I was living in a body that had decided it might not want to continue. And the message the external world sent me, with great clarity and institutional authority, was, "You are the problem. You are dangerous. You are the one who needs to be contained. The one with oppositional defiant disorder." That was her clinical name. You want to know where Jung became visceral for me? Right here. The shadow forms in the gap between what we feel and what we are allowed to feel. I had a gap the size of a canyon. Everything that could not be witnessed, the grief, the terror, the love that had nowhere to land, the rage that was actually proportionate to what had been happening, all of it went underground. The most tender part, the youngest part, the one that just needed someone to see and hold her. She went into exile. I did not have her name yet. I did not know she would be called Gypsy, Jinx, my earth angel, wounded inner child. But I felt her go quiet. Something became very still, and she had gone somewhere I could not follow. Not yet. What followed was adolescence, and I use that word loosely because adolescence implies a developmental arc, a progression through stages that, if you are lucky, happens in a home with enough safety and nurturing that you can actually grow into yourself. self-actualize. We'll talk about that more in season 3. But for now, that is not what I had. What I had was group homes, juvenile lockups, family in between who loved me but could not reach the part of me that was running. They tried. They genuinely tried. But no one could get through to little Lucia. She was not controllable. She was not trying to be. She had already decided at 12 years old that the only safety available was the kind she made herself. I used fake names, not as the deliberate persona work we do now with the Trinity of Self. Gypsy, Lucia, Issa Rose. Those names came later, and they came with intention, and they were given to us, and they were gifted to us. These were different. These were survival masks. Thin coverings over the real me, the one who was still somewhere underneath all of it, small and wounded and very, very tired. The one I was trying to keep hidden precisely because she was the one who could most be hurt. By 14 years old, Lucia was running the show, and she ran right toward anything that felt like belonging, like being wanted, like mattering to someone. I was filling a void with whatever was available, and what was available was not always safe, and what sometimes looked like freedom was covered in coercion. What felt like being chosen was exploitation by people who understood exactly how to find a girl with nowhere safe to go, and no adult who could reach her. I did not have the clinical language for what was happening to me then. I would not have it until years later when I became a human trafficking support specialist at the YWCA of Western Massachusetts, and finally looked back at my own adolescence and recognized what I had survived. I had been groomed into CSEC, commercial sexual exploitation of children. The danger I was navigating was not random. It was not incidental. It was predatory. It was deliberate. And it was directed at a girl who had been failed by family, by systems, by entire structures that were supposed to hold her and left her visible to people who prey on exactly that kind of exposure. The full story will be in the upcoming books, but what belongs here is this. She was a child trying to fill a wound that kept getting deeper. The emptiness she was trying to escape was not weakness. It was the shape of everything that had been taken from her. I'm telling you this not for your sympathy. I'm telling you this because the part that kept me alive through that period, the one who said, if no one will protect me, I'll protect myself. She was doing things that did not look like healing, sometimes choosing the lesser harm when there was no good option available. She made decisions. I have had to grieve and forgive and understand in equal measures. The world called her dangerous. Jung would have called her my shadow part, not because she was malevolent, but because she was condemned by the world, labeled, contained, treated as the evidence of damage rather than the architect of survival. She was not running in the dark because she was broken. She was running lost in the dark because no one knew how to turn the light on. And that is not her failure. That is the failure of every adult, every system, every institution that looked at a grieving child who fought back and said, criminal, instead of child in crisis, instead of what do you need, instead of I see you and I'm not going anywhere. You are safe. She adapted to the world she was given, and she survived it. She carried every part of me. Gypsy, quiet, in the dark in a corner. Issa Rose forming somewhere in the distance like a shape through fog. through decades of systems and streets and survival. And she is the reason I'm here to have this conversation. I owe so much to her. She kept me alive. And I spent years trying to turn away from her, trying to become quieter, someone less intense, someone who did not scare people, someone who fit better into the rooms she kept blowing up. What I did not understand then is what this whole season is helping me articulate is that she was not the problem. She was the response to the problem. She does not have a name yet at this point in the story. That comes later. The naming is its own journey, and we're on our way there. Today, she is just the unnamed fierce one, the part that rose when everything else went quiet, the part that protected me with every cell in her body. I battled her for a long time. I want to be honest about that. I am not here to tell you I figured this out quickly or always gracefully. The shadow work, the integration of her, has been the inner work for years and is still ongoing. It is the work. We are going to keep diving deeper into that through this season and beyond. On episode 7, May 2nd, we specifically get into what it looked like when I finally stopped fighting her. But we're not there yet. For now, I want to plant this seed. If you are listening to this and you identify a part like her that got loud when quiet did not work, a part the world has been calling damaged, a disorder, dysfunctional, I want you to consider something. What if that part has been doing its job this entire time? Not perfectly, not without cost, but diligently. Before we give you this reflection prompt, one more thing. Last month, in February 2026, something happened that I'm still finding words for. My mother and I reconnected. After everything. After all the years and all the names and all the distance that survival put between us. I am not going to unpack that fully today. That conversation belongs to a much bigger episode, and it is going to land exactly where it should. Week 8, the season finale, on Mother's Day weekend in May. That is where the story gets the space it deserves. What I will say right now is this. The wound and the reconnection are both true at the same time. And that is part of integration, a resolution of pain into peace, and the willingness to hold all of it at once. We are working on it, and I'm grateful for that. Now the reflection prompt for this week. What part of yourself have you called the enemy? The one that shows up too aggressive, too sharp, too much, too vocal? That might actually be a protector. What was it protecting you from? And what would it need from you now to finally rest? Don't answer it quickly. Don't answer it out loud if you are not ready. Get a journal and let that part write through you. That part of you already knows. If you are still here, thank you. I do not take lightly the fact that you chose to spend this kind of time with us and our story. The blog post for this week, Carl Jung, The Shadow and Why Your Darkness is Not Your Enemy, is live at sproutfromdarkness.com on the Gathered Fragments page. If you want the framework written out, the clinical language, the full Lens 2 breakdown, that's where it is. The blog and the podcast are companions. Go read it after this. Sit with both in the garden. Visit us on Facebook, S.P.R.O.U.T Soul Reflections. Engage with each episode's corresponding community post. If you want a place to respond, to share, to be connected with others on our soul retrieval journey. This is where we gather. This podcast will branch to more platforms as we grow. Everything begins here. If this episode found you where you needed it, please share it. The person who needs this testimony may not know where to go to search for it. Someone who loves them has to put it in front of them. Before we go, we want to leave you with one thing. The part that emerged at age 12, the one that did not yet have a name, the one the world called dangerous. She did not stop working when adolescence ended. She kept going. She kept adapting. She kept finding new names to hide behind and new ways to survive what survival required. One of those names was Serenity Delph, a name that means to search and dig for peace. Prophetic, though I did not know it yet. That is the name I was using in 2018 when I got arrested. And that is where we are going next. Episode 4, The Survival Names and Serenity Delph, drops Saturday, April 11th. And we are going to talk about internal family systems, what you've been hearing about in every episode. The clinical language that helped give us a framework for what survivors already knew, named parts such as parts inside us, identified as exiles, firefighters, the self. And then we are going into the testimony, the names, the years they carried me, the arrest that became a rescue, the moment the system that had always criminalized me became somehow the instrument of something I can only call grace. It might be a longer episode. It might need to be. Next week's reflection prompt is already waiting for you. If your most protective part had a name, what would it be? Start thinking about it. Come back Saturday. I am Issa Rose Sophia. We are your garden guides, the triple goddess trinity of self. This is Sprout from Darkness. We are in season 2, but we are just getting started. See you next week in our garden.